protection issues. So you're looking at how do we make sure that children are safe, but then how do we also ensure that there are resources necessary for capacity building or capacity strengthening, specifically when it comes to them accessing education. And that leads into international development, which is a bit more long-term, and it's looking at how do we set these affected populations up for success. And it's looking at education, but also continuing to make sure that children and their families are safe. We're looking at economic development. So how do we make sure that the family is well equipped to actually assimilate or integrate into these local communities? It looks at jobs, it looks at employment and things like that. So there's a clear, distinct distinction between humanitarian relief and international development. One is focusing more on short-term relief. The other one is looking at, recovery and rebuilding. And so that's where you get into the sticky situation of education in emergencies. It's not really a sector in humanitarian assistance, but education definitely is a sector in international development. And so when it comes to developing countries who have to take in a mass influx of refugees who've been affected by either natural disasters or conflict in their home countries, you have to look at setting them up for success while also meeting their basic needs.
Thank you, Chelsea. Yeah, and I was going to add to that within Cameroon, there is a reputation of Cameroon as a very neutral and safe space for people that are being affected by refugee crisis, and even in spite of the current internal Anglophone crisis that is affecting mainly Cameroonians, people who have refugee status feel relatively safe in Cameroon. And so that is the reason that they're coming there, but that does not mean that there is not internal distress that should be ignored or overlooked in terms of international development and the long-term effects of that. We are probably going to see within the next couple of decades what it's going to look like in terms of education and international development for Cameroon, if there's going to be more of an influx of refugees into the country and maybe more of an exodus for those that are internally displaced. But at this time, there is a consensus within Cameroon based on our research that refugees feel that it's a neutral territory for them and that it is a safe place to land. Can you go to the next slide? So the 2018 academic year, our study abroad program with SIT led us to do collaborative research on refugee students, as I mentioned before, and we were able to provide tools and skills during their integration into the Cameroonian education system, which aids in their success upon return, if they choose to return or go somewhere else to another safe haven country. And so one of the things that I was going to share about the refugee children that we work with is that they are very, I feel like they're very hopeful, and they're also very intelligent. They're just lacking basic everyday needs, which is why through my GoFundMe, we were able to supplement a little bit book supplies, school supplies, clothing, shoes, the basic necessities of everyday life that were impeding them from being able to be successful in education didn't come from maybe the internal distressors that came from the crisis that they were experiencing externally, but it was more so just the physical effects of that crisis that we were able to support. And Respect Cameroon also actively is supporting them with providing them with supplies and tools. I, at this time, don't believe that there's any mental health services. I do know of someone who is a really incredible mental health therapist who works specifically with refugees. And I know that they work with those in crisis for something called EMDR therapy, which allows basically for the body to have a visceral feeling and experience of the kind of trauma that they have faced. And then also within my time in Cameroon. I didn't actively do this with the students in Cameroon, but it's something I've done in Guatemala, Honduras, and in the US working with refugee students in DMV schools. And what we did with GW, with their Refugee Education Advocacy Lab, is we did art storytelling. And so we would have the students that were from these countries, El Salvador, Honduras, these are the countries I work with right now. We would have these students to come and do art therapy and storytelling and communal storytelling. We had students from Afghanistan doing the same thing, and they would share their experiences and reflect on them together through storytelling. And this is something I know a lot of people may say is a bit difficult to implement into cultures like mental health when you're talking about like language. Like what is the verbiage in French or Spanish, right, for mental health services or emotional intelligence? Like there's not a lot of understanding of what these words mean, the context of them. And so one thing that I would say that I've seen impact my students positively that have faced these circumstances is storytelling. And it's something that through my research I recognize is really, really huge to international development. And also creating in small like villages and in small communities, creating like spaces where people are able to reflect with one another through artistry and through storytelling, which is really cultural, especially to the kinds of societies that are facing these kinds of crises. And so that's just something I wanted to add in briefly. You can go to the next slide.
Actually, I would like to add two things to that. So I did work with refugee students as part of Respect Cameroon, and you can really see the need for tools and skill building in these children. They're very intelligent and very smart, but they do lack the resources. Back then, Respect Cameroon would have like maybe $50,000 in grants from the US government, and that was only every 2 years. So you can imagine that small amount of money being allocated to different parts of running the actual organization and not being able to have enough to actually support these students. I mean, they're very eager to learn. They will come to school every day, and you will see them in torn clothes. You'll see them not in the best of state, but they are actually eager to learn. And fundraising such as the one that Lydia did is actually very important because you have resources and then you have support from the government, but it may not be enough to actually support these children. And then another thing, back to Lydia's point about mental health services, we actually have a sector in the humanitarian protection sector itself, and it's actually mental health and psychosocial support. We also have child protection, gender-based violence, and that's something that we were focusing on when I was at the USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. Now, are there a lot of mental health services being focused on within humanitarian relief structures? No, but it is an important part of relief and healing and recovery. And so you can actually see that within the broader theory of humanitarian development, peace building nexus. So I just wanted to put that out there, that it is a part of the actual practice of humanitarian affairs. But when you're looking at developing countries actually supporting refugees, it tends to be on the back burner. And I had a colleague at USAID, and she was actually visiting Cameroon right before everything happened last year. And she was telling me that there is a lack of resources and focus on mental health services in Cameroon. So that is something that needs to be focused on now with this whole humanitarian restructure that the Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is doing right now. I'm not sure if that's an area of responsibility that will be focused on within this context, but it is something that we should be advocating for. So I'll move on to the next slide.
Thank you, Chelsea. Yes, so right now, as Chelsea mentioned, there is a lot of different dialogue about what is considered ethical, especially during this time period where we're seeing a total revamping of support for refugees. And one thing that was made abundantly clear to me in undergraduate, which has supported me in graduate school, is that everything that we do with refugee students is confidential, and that we are to support them without any photos of their face on the internet, showcasing or sharing any of their stories without them being made aware. And so this goes into the research that we did. Like, we confirmed and did consensus for every single interview, every single question, every single aspect of our research. We made sure that there was mutual consent, but also that there was protection for them. Because sometimes, especially when you're working with a vulnerable population like children, and George Washington really, really emphasized this to me, there are a lot of steps that you have to make, especially for a vulnerable population like children, to be able to be supported and protected, especially when doing research. And so it's important to not just make assumptions that they will naturally be protected, but to actually put in steps to implement that they are protected. And so one of the things that I definitely recommend any researchers, I see we have a few on here, to do is to make sure that if you can have conversations, not just with the students directly, but with the guardians present. Don't ever go into the vulnerable population with students and not have the conversations either with their guardians present or with their school administration present. One-on-ones, with them, I would always recommend have somebody witnessing your conversations with them. And then also making sure that anything that they share with you stays anonymous. And what was another thing that I recognized? So through the grant writing that we did with GW, when we went to support these students from Afghanistan, we would ask them, are you okay with sharing this? What are your boundaries with talking about triggers, for example? So Afghanistan, there's a lot of triggers around military militia. So as we're working with, these were young girls, the Afghani girls we work with, as we're working with them and we're talking with them, and also Afghani boys, we would ask, what are your boundaries in regards to discussing A, B, C, or D? And how do you feel about the conversations about military and militia? And also giving them full space to kind of have a different range of opinions, not trying to sway them in any way, is super important. And I think that's everything I wanted to add to ethical considerations.
Yeah, and I just wanted to chime in as well. So when you're considering the ethical practice of incorporating, participatory methods in your research, you should also have consent forms ready for your interviewers, specifically for children. Make sure that the guardian is also actually signing these forms for the children as well as for themselves. And that was something that we had to consider at Relief for Children, which is where I work as Chief Operating Officer. We conducted our baseline assessment, so basically more a survey of community needs in Ensawam in Ghana. And what we worked on really was making sure that we had the consent of each and every individual. And that means having consent forms ready, either printed out or digital. And so that's just something that I would advise.
Yeah, that's something that I definitely forgot about. Thank you, Chelsea, for bringing that to our attention.
And I'm so sorry, I do want to do a time check also.
We can speed it up if we need to. That's okay.
Maybe, just I think in the next 3 to 5 minutes, if you could move through the presentation just so we have enough time for
we can skip
Akiko
this one.
Also.
That's fine. We can skip this slide and we can go to the next slide. Okay, so I'll quickly try to summarize what we see here. So this is desk research that we were able to do, and we were able to learn about what UNICEF has in terms of reports for refugees and activities that they provide for them, as well as academic scholarships that are available to them. International legal research, this is something that was created through the Article 1, Section A of the 1951 Convention on Status Relating to Refugees. What is the definition of a refugee? Who qualifies for refugee status? And then the 1965 Assembly of African Heads of State in Accra, Ghana, finding resolutions to the problems of refugees in Africa and what it looks like to support them in special provisions. So this is actually a picture we took with a minister of Cameroonians basic education. And I believe, what we would call that in the U.S. would be childhood early development. So basically the early stages of education for children. And so basically what he was able to support us with was getting information on data analysis. And we were able to learn about the Cameroonian government's efforts into supporting refugees, and also information about the partnership with UNICEF that was created, and how they were able to support them with primary education, which is completely free. Oh, and free healthcare. So this. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. This is your slide.
Yeah. So we actually also interviewed. I forgot. I think she's one of the deputy directors of Respect Cameroon, which was the organization I had done my internship with. And so they really do specialize in education, child protection, basically looking at that specific refugee population. How do we make sure that children not only have access to education, but quality education? That means actually having books, notebooks, pads, pencils, and things like that. They distribute non-food items, but their activities are centered more so in the East region where I was placed. And they really do support more so refugee children from the Central African Republic, as well as their parents. And so sometimes they also host adult education classes in the evening. That was not something that happened when I was there. I think that was before I had arrived, but they do make sure that, education is at the forefront of their work when it comes to working with vulnerable populations such as refugees.
Okay, so the data collection that we did, we surveyed 10 teachers, and they had 6+ years of teaching experience, and they had 8+ years of working with refugee children. And this was kind of what we were able to learn from them over the course and amount of years of experience, through the questionnaires, like what the needs were of the student. And what we were able to find is basically like what Chelsea and I have already shared from the teacher surveys. And also we talked a little bit with the principals and headmasters as well. So the average class size is 40 to 120, which obviously shows that not all of the students can be supported individually. And so that's why we decided to kind of create like a crowdfunding opportunity to kind of address individual refugee students' needs, because there is a large class size, which for the teacher's capacity makes it very limited to support a full range of students in that way. And so that's kind of what we were able to recognize, is there's more of a capacity that they need to have more capacity for the amount of students that the government is trickling into the country. 60% of students reported they encountered challenges with non-Cameroonian students, while 30% said that sometimes they had issues and 10% said no. The literacy rates, 40% teachers have this challenge with them. A lot of them come in speaking different languages. And I think also I should mention that Cameroon has 10 different regions. 2 speak English, 8 speak French. The French-speaking regions is usually where the students are landing, and not all of them come speaking French, so then there also has to be French language classes and things implemented like that. I'm trying to summarize this. This is 90% of teachers. Oh, it's okay. I was just gonna say that the adaptation is something that the students struggle with, because there's no real support in regards to the transition. Okay, so 50% reported that the school does not give support to refugee children. One teacher reported that the school offers scholarships, while other reported that some refugee families do not have to pay school fees. One reported that they receive materials from the UNHCR, which is amazing, but obviously with the school working to provide training for school teachers who work with refugees, it's something that really they need more support in that regard. But you can see that there is an attempt to support, which is a good thing. You can go to the next one. So these are some of the headmasters and teachers and principals you worked with. Data collection did not align accurately within the timeline, and the directors wanted us to individually visit the teachers to pass out the surveys. The availability of teachers clashed with our schedule because we also had our own classes. And so we learned that we had to kind of be more explicitly direct about what it was that we needed, and we learned that on the back end. And we also learned that we need to have started this project a little bit earlier than we actually did. Cameroon has created this, well, the school we work with in Cameroon has created this like thank you letter and note for the creation of the GoFundMe. Here's a picture of us with the teachers and the students. And the school is Infandena Public School, which is in Yaoundé, Cameroon. And we talked with the preliminary context and guiding refugee families towards government institutions through partnership with the Ministries of Education. And this is just like the data and the numbers about what we look at regarding long-term stay in the country of Cameroon for refugees, which is 232,000 plus. And then one thing we also mentioned that I think is important is that African countries a lot of time get told what to do and not being asked what they need. And that's something that I think should be brought into consideration when it comes to research. Don't go there telling them what it is that you know as a theoretical researcher, but actually actively participating in their systems, their culture, and requesting, information, how you can better support them and collaborate. Collaborative research is needed at this time more than ever, and is critical to the future. Thank you for listening.
Great. Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you, Lydia. And we will have a large time, about 20 minutes at the end for questions. And so we're going to move right on to have Akiko present. So Akiko, over to you.